There are a number of things that I would have liked to have written in the book, but I did not have much proof for them because it's supposed to be a biography. And in a biography, you have to say, generally, you have to evidence what you're doing. But if I was to be more creative, I would have said, it's the strong possibility he painted Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, when she was very young. And this was when he was in detention in London, in Aleksandra Palace. I think it's quite likely that he painted her there, because later in his life, he commented, when he saw a picture of her to a friend, he said, "Oh, I painted her once." But he added that he found her hands to be quite smaller than usual in the painting, so he had to make them bigger. And this is a kind of painterly comment. So it makes me think that he was thinking about this person. So maybe he was painting her. And Queen Elizabeth, the young Elizabeth Rose Gower, she went on to become the last Empress of India. And in a way, during the British rule, the British Empire, she was in effect the queen of maybe a quarter of the planet's citizens. So he painted her. And I think that's one thing I would have liked to have spent more time on. I think they met Picasso as well. I think that's likely. Because when they eloped to get to escape her parents so they could get married, they went to live in France. But at the moment, I have no evidence of where they lived. But I think it's almost certain that they would be in Paris and they would be going to the salons in Paris. And the time period is probably about 1896 to maybe 1900, or maybe early 1900, maybe 1901, 1902. So there is a good possibility. And later on in her life, Elizabeth mentions Picasso almost as a passing comment in a letter to a friend. And she said, "Oh, I see he's bought this castle for $1 million." And there was no reason for her to say that, unless maybe she had some knowledge of him, I think. So I think maybe they met the young Picasso. From what I've researched, I think it was an incredible place, a melting pot, a mixing pot, because the majority of people from Europe who were going to the United States, their last place on this side of the Atlantic was nearly always Liverpool. So it was like, it's the equivalent of a huge airport today. It'd be like Heathrow Airport, with lots of people going through, and a lot of migrant groups and a lot of foreign voices in the city. And Lipczynski came without speaking any English. So he would have been probably speaking mostly German, because we know that he only spoke Polish not so well. He was a foreigner in a strange land, having to find a place for himself in this migrant community. And I think probably, I mean, again, it's speculation, but I think he probably wanted to go to the New World as well. But like so many people, your last port of call is Liverpool, and like many people, he stayed here. So he started to make this his home as an artist, and he began to work, and he began to get commissions. And he found a reason to be here. And I think the main reason he found to be here was, of course, Elizabeth. Well, it was a year when many big things came together. For him as an artist, he was shown in an incredible exhibition in what is now the Blue Coat Chambers in Liverpool. In 1911, the Sandon Studio Society, they hosted a special event, an exhibition, which was built from an exhibition in London, which was probably the most surprising, the most outstanding post-impressionist exhibition in the 20th century. So this was called Manet and the Post-Impressionists in London. And what isn't widely known is that over about 53 works came from that exhibition and were shown in Liverpool and were mixed with some of the local artists from the Sandon Studios. And Albert Lipczynski had 2 of his paintings shown in the same exhibition as Van Gogh, Picasso, and Gauguin. And I think it's when I was researching this, I thought, this is incredible. This man that is lost a little bit to history. That well, look, at this point in 1911, he was somewhere. Maybe they didn't know maybe they didn't know the importance at the time, because, you know, obviously later on these artists gained more prominence. But still, it was an amazing thing to happen in provincial Liverpool at that time. Now, at the same time, in the summer, maybe 3 or 4 months on from that time of the exhibition, there was a workers' strike. Amazing events happened in Liverpool in 1911. There was a near revolution near St George's Hall, and it's famous now because the police were quite brutal that day, and they hit a lot of men, women and children. But at the same time, it was a glimpse of the possibility of an uprising, and it's certainly, from what I've researched, one of the strongest union actions in Britain in the 20th century. And we know that soon after that the Russian Revolution happened and other things. So there was a hint that there could have been a British Revolution, and they were very worried in government at the time. They positioned a warship in the river with its guns pointing towards the city as a little message. And the Pathé films that were made of the strike, they were removed at the time. So they didn't want publicity of what was happening. And it was led mainly by anarcho-syndicalist movement, which was an interesting political socialist movement. And Lipczynski knew some of these people. So this is nice. And I have responsibility for saying that. It's a very difficult thing to say. I can say what I saw in it. But I think when you are a biographer of someone, you give your interpretation. It's a relationship between yourself as a person and the subject you are studying. So it is never a true reflection of the subject. So it is more of a conversation. But if I was to say the meaning of Lipczynski's life was a life of adventure, of experiment, of courage, of love, of determination, of stubbornness, lots of human qualities. But for me, the most interesting thing is the bond between him and Elizabeth. And on top of that, I would say the most interesting thing is the journey of history. He lived for 98 years. And during that time, they saw some amazing things. The world turned on its head. Europe changed. His identity was questioned almost at every turn. He never fitted in, or he never wanted to fit in after a while. When you get older, you don't want to change your ways, and you just say, well, this is who I am. And I think he eventually went that way. So he's for me, he's like a metaphor. This man carries a message about European identity, about the 20th century, about war, and about what it means to belong. So I was so lucky to write about it, because not just for Lipczynski's sake, but because he let me, this subject let me explore some of these other themes, and it allowed me to understand a little bit more, just a small bit, about Polish history and the history in Danzig Free State. And this opened my eyes as an Englishman to the history of Europe. Well, we have accounts from his friends who visited him, and I don't know how well he coped on the Isle of Man, because people who were behind this huge fenced barbed wire in Knockalow camp in the Isle of Man, there were about 20,000 of them at any time. And I think that was huge pressure for the people there, because they were away from their families, their loved ones, and they were all cooped up together. People have written about that period, and they talked about barbed wire fever, which is this idea of a kind of madness almost, from being cooped up, from being closed in and being trapped with other people, and only hearing their voices and not the voices that you want to hear. Now, I think this will have a very powerful effect on a sensitive man, an artist like him. But we've learnt that his last place of incarceration, which was Aleksandra Palace in London, that he coped better, because he was able to create a kind of tiny artist studio around his bed with a screen and some sacking to create a small space where perhaps people would not look in. And we've learnt that there was a queue of people, including officers and other people, British officers, who eventually would queue up and get their painting done by him. So he occupied his time doing portraits. And like many artists, when you're able to do the thing you love, then you're able to cope. The rest of the world doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So I think whether he stumbled on it or whether he designed this, it was the opportunity for him to cope. And it allowed him to keep his sanity, I think, until eventually he was deported.